Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon where you are. Welcome to the webinar of the Institute for Global Health and Development in partnership with the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, Pakistan. This is one of the series of such activities that we do. We are holding this after a lull of a few months, but on a very important topic. And some of the reasons for us not holding this earlier has also been the fluidity of the situation. It's my great pleasure to begin this webinar on one of the most important contemporary topics in Pakistan, which is really our water challenges, both from within and without. And this is a topic which is not just relevant to the issue of climate change and environmental factors, but also related to our history. The fact that we as a nation have been dependent upon sources of water from other geographies as a legacy of the partition of the Indian subcontinent. And this is also now beginning to emerge as a global security issue. So we are going to cover a number of these topics in our webinar over the next 1 hour. And I'm very, very pleased to introduce our distinguished marquee of speakers. Our first speaker today is none other than Dr. Moeed Yusuf, who is one of the most distinguished contemporary scholars and academic leaders in Pakistan. He has an academic background, having taught political science and international relations at some of the leading institutions of the world, such as Boston University, George Washington University, LUMS, and Quaid-e-Azam University. I'm particularly pleased to welcome him because I'm on faculty at BU and GWU. So it's great to have a fellow scholar amongst us. And he has had a distinguished career as Pakistan's youngest national security advisor and actually the author of one of our most distinguished and remarkable national security reports, which includes many elements of human development that hitherto have not been included. So he has also served as an associate vice president at the U.S. Institute of Peace and is an accomplished writer. And he'll be speaking to us about the issue of Pakistan's water challenges with a lens on how does this relate to the international situation, and particularly the situation with our border areas. Following him, we have none other than Nasir Memon, who is no stranger to our IGHD audiences, because he is also a distinguished colleague and one of Pakistan's foremost experts in climate and water management and disaster management. He has an extensive background in policy analysis, advocacy, and program implementation in environmental sustainability. And he's one of my favorite persons because he's also one of the bravest and most outspoken persons in this field, which is also now these days fraught with all kinds of political considerations. So welcome, Nasir. And then we will have comments from Ali Tawqir Sheikh, who is a distinguished independent expert on water and climate management in Pakistan. And I'll introduce him a little bit when I accept him as a commentator later on in the session. So with this kind of a marquee, I would like to give them ample time. So our format would be that these two speakers that I've just outlined, Dr. Moeed Yusuf and Nasir Memon, will speak. And then I'll invite Ali Tawqir Sheikh to offer his comments. And then we have a moderated discussion, which will then round this off. But hopefully, we hope to finish soon after 5 p.m. Pakistan time. So without further ado, let me pass the floor to Dr. Moeed Yusuf to talk us through Pakistan's security challenges related to water and what are the implications for regional peace and development. So, sir, with great pleasure, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Saab. I'm very, very grateful, first of all, for the invitation. I'm grateful to you and your team for putting this together. Very, very topical issue, as all of us know. And I'm also very glad that you're combining the strategic dimension of this with the climate and environment dimension. Because a lot of times I feel in Pakistan, we end up talking in silos. My world talks to itself, the environment world talks to itself, and then the economic world and social world talk to themselves. So these are all cross-cutting issues. In fact, my very first point to you is that there's so much focus on the Indus Water Treaty and the legal domain, given India's position that they're holding the treaty in abeyance. In reality, this is all a political, security, and legal issue combined, underpinned by the reality that ultimately climate and environment is what should drive how water is shared and how we manage our water in Pakistan itself. So let me talk to you about sort of the strategic dimension as it comes to international politics and regional politics. What I think viewers or listeners have to understand here is why this issue has come up in the way that it has now. And there I will take you to a unfortunate reality, which is that India and Pakistan for 75 years have basically competed with each other. India trying to become the sole hegemon of the region, and Pakistan trying to ensure that it becomes a counter hegemon and does not give India space to dictate terms to Pakistan as a satellite state, as we feel that India has done with some of its other neighbors. This is the first time, and there are a combination of factors that have brought this together. This is the first time that the Indian government in New Delhi believes that India has reached a power differential with Pakistan, whereby they now have the right and the ability and capability to dictate terms on certain issues that they could never do before. I said combination of factors. One is empirical, which is that the power differential has grown multifold in the past 30 years. India has performed economically, and then, of course, the resources have gone into defense, etc. But there's also ideology, an unfortunate ideology which actually sees India in a civilizational sense, in a supremacist sense, where the neighborhood belongs to India and its rules must apply. And there's one country that has held a position which essentially says that my raison d'etre is not to allow you to do that. For 75 years, this uneasy imbalance has continued. We've ended up in moments of crises and wars. We've ended up in slightly more decent moments and of peace. But the last 7 or 8 years, the Indian government, the Modi government, has decided that they are not going to create a civilized relationship in any form or substance. They will try and isolate Pakistan internationally, and they'll try and build more and more pressure to get certain things, whether it's territorial disputes like Kashmir, whether it is the international presence and clout, whether it is which trading blocs and economic blocs Pakistan can join versus not. India has had much more clout over that space. Any ideology that builds on supremacy and invincibility of an idea will always end up in a position of overstretching and doing something that will at some point misfire and put them in a position where they would have exaggerated their capacity or underestimated the adversaries or the others' capacity. And what you saw in May this year was essentially an Indian government that had convinced itself and its people that we are now at a point where we can really try and dictate terms. We can convince the world that Pakistan is at a point of weakness, is at a point of disarray, that all we need to do is ensure that they understand who will sort of call the shots, if you will. And that's where this crisis actually has given them a bit of a pause, given how the crisis developed. Of course, that's not the topic for today. I've laid out this preamble to tell you why IWT. The Indus Water Treaty, India has wanted to alter for a number of years now. In fact, I was just looking, the first statement of note is in 2002 during a crisis moment where their water resources minister says that we are going to get rid of IWT. Why? Because there's a fundamental issue that India has been dealing with again and again when it comes to water sharing, and that is that they do not like the dispute resolution mechanism built into the IWT. All of us know that this was a World Bank, quote unquote, facilitated or brokered treaty. The Americans were a major part of this when this happened. It's a treaty that stood the test of time. Everybody likes to say that. Um, but it's got a dispute resolution mechanism that allows Pakistan to first challenge any projects that India does on its side of the line of control on Kashmir. And then ultimately, if the two sides don't agree, it goes into a court of arbitration and a neutral expert, and there are differences of opinion between India and Pakistan on how to manage that process. India's view is that every time Pakistan objects, they lose time and the cost of their projects increases. So even before this held in abeyance status, if you will, there were two significant issues that India or IWT was dealing with. One, India had sent multiple notices to Pakistan to renegotiate the treaty. And the second one was that there were proceedings going on in terms of disputes, both at the Court of Arbitration and something called the neutral expert, which is another avenue provided by the treaty to resolve differences. On the Pakistani side, we had decided not to respond to India's demands for renegotiation because we were not compelled by the treaty to do so. On the other hand, we were also in a position where we were making these decisions somewhat in silos, and there wasn't a clear strategic picture on where Pakistan ultimately thought this would go and where it wanted to go. At this point, if you ask me, the principal goal for any objective party and India and Pakistan, and here I speak purely intellectually, must be to preserve the treaty. This is not a Pakistan or an India position or a World Bank position. Bottom line is you've got 2 billion South Asians. This is not India and Pakistan only. The treaty is India and Pakistan, but its implications and consequences are going to go across South Asia. You've got 2 billion South Asians. You've got 250 million in Pakistan. You've got millions and millions in India who will actually be affected if this treaty is undermined, let alone let go. So I see no rational possibility or no rational reason or logic to actually throw the baby out of the bathwater. There may be issues with the treaty. There may be, Pakistan also has a number of sort of concerns about how it's being implemented or what the neutral expert has done in the past. But the treaty itself needs to be preserved if we want to have some modicum of predictability in how water usage and division would go forward in South Asia. In that stead, unfortunately, my submission at this point is that South Asia is closest to water wars than it has ever been or the world has been for years and years. The reason for that is that the Indian government has not done what it's done with the IWT today because there was something that happened out of the ordinary at this moment. The crisis was simply the excuse to do what they had wanted to do for a long time. They've taken a very safe legal kind of position. It's still in force, but it's not in force. And so they are essentially hoping that they will not get legal challenges from Pakistan that will be upheld. The world would kind of look the other way, and they would gradually begin to create space to divert water. Now, in this is a larger strategy of dealing with Pakistan with a stick, trying to put Pakistan in a box and grossly exaggerating their own capacity to do so and underestimating Pakistan's capacity to protect its own interests. If you're in this mindset, I see very little possibility of India looking at IWT as a self-contained question for protection of its people and Pakistan's people and respectable ways of dealing with disputes over water sharing. It is much more likely that they make this a purely political issue and get blinded by the obsession or desperation, it seems, to punish Pakistan for whatever, rather than looking at the issue as a humanitarian, as a climate, as an issue which needs to be dealt with on its own merit. I will put to you at this point, perhaps that there are three scenarios that I can see. First of all, I think Pakistan should continue, rightly it is saying so, that bilateral negotiations with India or anybody getting negotiations going with India are the way forward, with a clear red line that we are not going to get rid of the dispute resolution mechanism, because other than that, there is no ability to do anything for both countries. Also, keep in mind that this idea that people are saying that you can do ex parte decisions, do legal cases, go to the world. Yes, you can. But who's going to enforce them? In today's world where international law already, unfortunately, the regime is so weakened. So my view is that there have to be negotiations around this with one principle. Both sides will lose tremendously if IWT is thrown out of the baby out of the bathwater. And then I think the other thing to keep in mind is that this idea that India doesn't have the ability to divert or block water. That's correct. They won't have that ability to do so in a substantial way for a number of years. But there's so many other interim things that can happen. For instance, you could stop sharing data completely, and Pakistan's planning for flood and drought seasons will be affected directly. Right? You could give the Indus Water Commissioners, the meetings that happen can be completely stalled in a way that whenever there's need, even when there's need, you won't be able to do this. Then India did actually do this in the past in 48 when there was a dispute. It did actually stop diverting some water from the headworks, and it could still do the same to some extent, just symbolically, if not anything else. As I said, I see three scenarios here. Number one, you could actually get India refusing to renegotiate. India could say, sorry, I'm not interested, I'm going to stick to this. That is the single most dangerous place to be, because in this case, Pakistan cannot sit back and let it happen. I'm afraid you will end up in another crisis sooner or later, and that crisis may be far more dangerous than the one that we've just gone through. I don't think Pakistan, this is just my view. I think Pakistan will react against Indian infrastructure if something like that happens. That's the most dangerous, I think, scenario. The second one is that India says, okay, we backtrack, Pakistan and India sit down and start renegotiating the part of the dispute resolution without in any way jeopardizing it and identifying the other pain points in both sides, trying to address it. I also see this, unfortunately, as a low probability scenario. The third one, I think that probably for me is more likely, is that you're going to have a renegotiation. It's going to be a long drawn out process. There is going to be concern on the Pakistani side that the Indians are just buying time. They're not doing this seriously. India will want to buy time, but we don't know how that will play out. The important part is that if you go to scenario 3, you must also invoke scenario 1 immediately, which is that the treaty remains in force and everything continues as normal till they come out with a new solution or whatever they decide in terms of where the treaty is. Of course, Pakistan's going to go the legal route. Pakistan's going to go to the World Bank. It's going to find other forums. That will continue in parallel. I think India probably or surely expects that. But I think there has to be a part attached to that, which is about talking. The World Bank's response so far has been, we're not getting into this. I think that's very unfortunate, because ultimately they're the ones who are the original facilitators. But I think there's a lot of politics going on around that. The final point I'll make, number one, we are in a very difficult situation. IWT is not isolated from larger India-Pakistan politics. And as somebody who has written for years that for Pakistan's sake, but for the sake of both countries, India and Pakistan must get into a normalization process and have a better relationship. As that person, I'm telling you that I also had the experience of actually handling this account for 2.5 years, or one of the main people in government, and my view completely changed. And at this point, my view is that I think India's Pakistan policy is more ideological than pragmatic, and I don't see a rational change in terms of their position on IWT. If that is the case, unfortunately, we are in a very precarious situation where a crisis can occur sooner rather than later. The trigger could be anything, but this conversation will remain alive all the time. For that, and I'll stop after this, I go back to the fundamental question that I deliberately held off mentioning till the end, but to me, that is the make or break. Even without this Indus Water Treaty crisis, I would have said the same thing, which is Pakistan's internal water management has to become a top priority for the government of Pakistan. Now, it is even more important given the risk or the threat of what may happen if India doesn't operate as a civilized neighbor should. In this, the amount of water mismanagement in Pakistan, I think, is legendary. I'm not the right person to talk about it. All I can tell you is water security is part of Pakistan's national security policy for a reason. And the reason is that it is truly a national security issue. It was before the IWT crisis. It is even more so now. But a large part of the solution, even your negotiating hand with India and others, is going to be strengthened if we get our own house in order in terms of our water management, in terms of our water politics, in terms of our water pricing, and in terms of how this impacts our environment and climate, which I know the next speaker will be speaking to. Unfortunately, I don't see India doing what it should be doing right now. I also don't see a great likelihood that we will be able to manage our water the way we should for our own sake. Sorry to be pessimistic, but let me stop him.
Well, thank you so much, Mohit. That was a fascinating insight into what the challenges are. I'm sure there are going to be a bazillion questions, and we'll come back to this. But thank you very much for your insights and highlighting some of the core issues that are not going to go away. Let me, without further ado, turn over to Nasir Mehman, who I've already introduced, and talk a little bit, have him cover the issue of internal issues in Pakistan on interprovincial harmony and water security, with a focus on what can be done. So, Nasir, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Dr. Bhutta. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Water is such a vast and deep subject that it may take hours to debate it, and perhaps we will still be short of covering all the dimensions. But so far, the internal issues are concerned. To me, they are as serious as IWT issue could be, and I would have preferred to speak just directly without taking to the slides. I don't prefer that either, but now I have to show some of the numbers and digits and graphs, so that's why I requested the organizers to please arrange the slideshow. So I'll take you through these slides, but I'll try to remain focused on what are the challenges that we are currently facing in terms of the internal management of water in Pakistan, but not just to base around the problem side, but I'll try to conclude with the options that we have. Having cross-boundary conflicts are within country, the intra-provincial upstream and downstream, upper Raipan and lower Raipan conflicts on the shared waters are not unique to us, actually. They are part of many countries and within many countries. So we'll just diagnose the problem. We normally listen one thing. The title was very clear: the water security and interprovincial harmony. And I personally think without having interprovincial harmony, we won't be able to actually confront the challenge of IWT that it could pose us in the longer run. Let's move to the next slide, please. Now, when we talk about water, our first knee-jerk reaction is that we are short of water. And that's not altogether wrong. But do we really analyze the problem in a correct way? Look at the graph. This is very often repeated graph that our per capita water has declined. Yes, in 1951, our per capita water availability was close to 1,000 cubic meters per annum. And that has, close to 5,600 cubic meters per annum. And now it is about less than 1,000 cubic meters per annum. This is very critical because less than 1,000 means we are a water-stressed country. But while saying so, at times we only blame water, that water has gone somewhere. Water has perhaps disappeared. Someone has taken away our water. Actually, it's not true. The problem is on the other side, partly true, but not the whole story. The problem is that when this country came into being, our population in today's Pakistan, I'm not counting the former East Pakistan, now Bangladesh here. Today's Pakistan's population was 33 million. And today, mashallah, you have grown 250 million. So it's 8 times more. So then you can just proportionately see that what's the per capita water availability. So water is there. Nothing wrong with water. Yes, water is little less available than the past, but still water is available in abundance. So the problem to me fundamentally is our population. There are other problems too. We are the bad managers of water. We live in a arid area that has its own problem, our soil texture, lot of water losses, so many other problems. But the basic thing of the per capita availability, credit goes to our ever-growing population, and we seldom talk about it. So that I just wanted to set the context that where is the problem with our water. Next slide, please. At the same time, there's a myth that we have lots of water that we waste into Arabian Sea. You quite hear quite often what the chairman says so, sometimes prime minister says so. It has become a buzz that, yeah, there is a lot of water that is being wasted to sea. In fact, it is not. In totality, not just per capita water, but in totality, water available in our basin is reducing, is on decline. If you compare two data sets, the data of water availability during the last quarter of last century, 76 to year 2000, last quarter of last century, and compare with first quarter of this century, 25 years on both sides, and you can compare the situation of water. I'm putting here the official data of WAPTA and other sources. Western rivers, remember we have three eastern rivers that under Indus Water Treaty we handed over to India, and there are three western rivers, Indus, Jhelum, and Cherab, that are now called Pakistani rivers. So what is the situation of water availability in these two rivers? First, starting with the western rivers, during the last quarter of last century, the average annual flow was about 135 million acre feet. The million acre feet, for those who are not from the water sector, it's a storage unit. If you store 1 foot water spread uniformly over 1 million acres, it is called 1 million acre foot. So in that sense, we are 135 million acre feet in the last quarter of last century. And this quarter of this century, the average has gone down to 120.8 million acre feet. So there's a substantial decline. Now, causes are different, but mainly because of the climate change related factors that has actually caused the perpetual droughts in this area, and I'll explain it to the subsequent slides. But coming to the eastern rivers that we actually handed over to India in 1960 under IWT, in the last quarter of last century, the average annual flow was 9.3 million acre feet. That has gone substantially down to only about 3 million acre feet. 1/3, less than a third. It's mainly because these rivers belong to India, so India is diverting water rightfully under the IWT. So that's why we see a huge shortfall on the eastern rivers. And in the near future, it may be like less than a million acre feet flow, because these are not our rivers, unfortunately. Below Kotri, which is quite often quoted, there's a lot of water wasted below Kotri. What is the situation below Kotri? Last quarter of last century, yes, annual average flows were very high. There was 40.7 billion acre feet. But in this quarter of first century, it has gone well below 15 million acre feet, close to a third of it, a little less than a third. So you can imagine, a little more than a third. So what we used to call a lot of water being wasted, it has gone down from 40.7 million acre feet to only 14.8 million acre feet. If you take the data of last 25 years, out of those 25 years, there were 12 years when flows below Kotri were less than 10 million acre feet. This 10 million acre feet was agreed under the Water Accord of 1991, that to maintain the environmental sustainability and the ecosystem of Indus Delta, minimum 10 million acre feet annually will be released below Kotri, subject to certain studies, but this was provisionally agreed. But if you look at the data, when it is frequently reminded to us that you have a lot of water being wasted, there were half of the years when even that minimum water did not go below the Kotri barrage. Next, please. Yeah, this is the graphical representation of flows below Koti barrage. You look at the left side, this is the last quarter of the last century, and you can see flows are above the 10 million acre feet, and the averages above the average of the last 60 years, 50 years, you can see flows are well above the average flows. And in the following 25 years, you can visibly, one can see that the flows have grossly declined. So I just wanted to show the graphically that how the water has gone now. Next, please. Interestingly, one study that was conducted by international panel of experts, it said that daily at least 5,000 cusics of water should flow below the Koti daily, because ecosystems need water on a day-to-day basis, like human body. It's not that you supply water for a month or two in a year during monsoons, and then you say, okay, average it out, and that's fantastic. It doesn't work like that. So the experts said that to sustain ecological balance of Indus Delta, at least 5,000 cusics should flow every day below Kotli barrage. But again, last 25 years data, there were 13 years when there was a zero flow for more than 200 days in a year. Just try to grasp it. More than 200 days in a year, there were absolutely zero flow below the Kotli barrage. And such years were 13 out of 25 years. Whereas system requires at least 5,000 cusics every day. So this graph is another dimension of showing that how water is declining in our Indus basin system, and how less and less water is going to Arabian Sea. Next, please. Few more slides, and then we'll open for a discussion. Are we running dry? This is a very critical question, like a nightmare. Unfortunately, this is not untrue. It is happening very gradually. This year, 2025, UN released the World Water Development Report on the World Water Day. It was, I guess, 22nd March. And the report says that glaciers are retreating in the Hindu Kush Himalayas region at an alarming pace. And we are in the Indus draws water from this same region. There are 10 other big rivers as well. And it says that during the last 10 years, the melting pace was 65% faster than the previous decade. It's very, very alarming. And if the trend persists, one could actually see the projections over next 10 to 15 or 20 years. The World Bank report that was issued more than 2 decades before, but the report is still holds a lot of water. It's a title, you can find it from Google, Pakistan's Water Economy Running Dry. And it says that due to the rapid glacial retreat, the Indus Basin is likely to endure a colossal decrease of 30 to 40% in the coming decade. This is what has been said in that report, and we see it happening now. Remember, this year in March and now in June, 2 weeks ago, the Met Office has issued flash drought warnings in Pakistan. Flash drought is a very intense, severe drought that actually evaporates the soil moisture, and it becomes difficult to grow crops in that soil. So currently, Pakistan is going through the flash drought situation. Remember, in April, first week of April, when we should have 77,000 cusics flowing below Tonsa barrage for river for Sindh province, there was zero flows, and both Mangla and Tarbela dam were at absolute dead level in the first week of April. It is very rare that in the first week of April you find totally zero flows and the dam stretched to the dead level. So this is a serious challenge. Yes, unfortunately, a terrible truth is that we are running dry. Next, please. So what we should do then? This is the problem part. Overall, Pakistan ought to revisit water governance and water use approach, how we use water. And remember, more than 80, 90% we use in the agriculture sector, which is unfortunately the most inefficient way we use it. Water, and remember one important thing, water and land, these are two inputs. These are not outputs. Water is not output. Water is an input. Land is an input. And the output is crop. Output is grain. That's what worries us. So one approach is to see that our inputs is on decline, but how about output? Could we still think of some means to improve the output from the same input? I remind you to review a report, Crop Yield Gap Analysis 2022. The report was produced by Zarai Tarakkiyati Bank, and the data, and it has given data of certain years, of different crops, and of every province. And you will be shocked to see that the report says that we are producing only 38% of the grain that against our actual potential. So look at the space, humongous space available for Pakistan to actually grow more grain, take more output from the same input of land and water without creating any new conflicts, without putting people and provinces into a brawl against each other. So that is an opportunity which is least talked about. Next slide, please. These are a few tables from another report of the Tarakkiyati Bank. The title of the report, you can easily Google it. And if you just go through quickly, the wheat, rice, cotton, and maize, 4 major crops, and it provides the yield kilograms per hectare in different countries. And in the bottom, production of Pakistan is also given, yield is also given kilogram per hectare. And this is very disappointing that in all 4 crops, our average yield is much lesser than other countries. And I'm not just comparing with China and Indonesia, which are also in the same region, but more closer to Bangladesh and India, with all political, social, and other variables quite closer to us. And we are producing less than that. Why is so? Why our wheat is less than the average of India and Bangladesh? Why is our rice is less than that? All right, China has advanced technologies, new things, GM foods, etc. But these 2 countries are quite comparable to us with all other variables. So this is something that we need to really delve deeper, that our per acre yield is 20, 30, 40, or sometimes 50% less than our neighboring countries. And that offers us an opportunity to, rather fighting over the water, creating new conflicts through dams and canals, why don't we put our efforts here to increase our production and yield? And that's how we can actually achieve our objective of food and fiber security with the same amount of water and land that's presently available to us. Next, please. Lastly, our institutions. Look, there is unfortunate reality that there is institutional decay in Pakistan. Without any divide of opinion, everybody now concurs that there is a decay of institutions. Presently, though, the WAPDA is primarily the manager of water resources in Pakistan, and it's equally in a bad shape, unfortunately, like others. But 2 other platforms, Indus River System Authority and Council of Common Interest, these are constitutional bodies. They are mandated for distribution. IRSA is mandated for distribution of water and resolving day-to-day water distribution conflicts and claims under IRSA, whereas the Council of Common Interest is a higher forum where even complaints against IRSA could be lodged and provinces have right to access CCI to seek any relief. Unfortunately, these 2 institutions are very disappointing in terms of their performance and seriousness. Both are politically manipulated, and not just politically, now beyond political, other institutions are also manipulating. You might be aware, I'm sure you're aware of the recent controversy of 6 strategic canals in Pakistan. Sindh and Punjab are against odds against each other, and that was best time that CCI should intervene. Constitutionally, CCI has to meet every quarter, and water is under the jurisdiction of CCI because CCI has to deal with the Federal Legislative List 2, and water is a subject of Federal Legislative List 2. So CCI should have addressed it, but unfortunately it did not. For 15 months, CCI's meeting was not convened, which was supposed to be convened every 3 months to settle such issues. 15 months gone, no meeting was convened. Then there was a mass protest at Babarlo near Khairpur. The National Highway and the Indus Highway were blocked for 10, 12 days. Economic losses were enormous. And then only CCI woke up and a meeting was convened to settle the issue. IRSA issued a water availability certificate for a controversial Cholistan corporate farming canal. ask any IRSA member privately. If you have got friends, they will tell you that how they were actually forced in to issue this certificate, and each member would tell you that they were convinced that water was not available to the quantum required for this scheme, but since they were dictated and they obliged. So I think CCI and IRSA are the key institutions. They should be strengthened. They should be given the autonomy as it has been mentioned in the Constitution, and they should be made more inclusive. Their current construct of Council of Common Interest has severe questions. For example, presently there are 8 members in Council of Common Interest. 4 are alone from Punjab province. So half of the body belongs to one province. So you can see that there's an imbalance in case of any controversial decision making. If there is the voting, then there will be another conflict within the CCI. CCI meant for conflict will be enduring another conflict within its own self. So these three important institutions need to be really revitalized and allowed to function more democratically, inclusively, and autonomously. I think it was the last slide. Please just move forward. I guess this is the last slide. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nasir, for that very insightful and I would say forthright presentation. Nothing less than what we expected. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have time for questions now. And I see that there are a number of questions in chat, and I'll take the prerogative of maybe perhaps asking our speakers a direct question each, and then I will pass the floor for some final comments to our distinguished panelist, Dr. Ali Tawqir Sheikh. So, Mohit, starting with you, there's been a lot of bluster and statements that it is impossible for India to stop water for Pakistan, and there veiled statements in terms of action that we can take or would take for that to happen. How realistic is that scenario? Sorry, you're muted, Mohit.
Sorry. With all the technology in the world, this is one that keeps embarrassing us every time we're on Zoom. No, look, I mean, I think it's a wrong question and the wrong focus. This idea that a country will starve 250 million people of water completely is ludicrous. It's never going to happen that way. I don't think the world is ever going to let it happen that way, even if India wanted to. They don't have the infrastructure. They'll have the infrastructure if they really put their mind to it in the next 15 years, okay, let's say. But I think it's the wrong focus because there is so much between that and today that can be done to harm Pakistan. As I said, if only data, you get the wrong data, you don't get data the way you should, then predicting flood and drought season and planning for them is going to be far more difficult. Canals, yes, they could divert to some extent. The real question, Dr. is why are we even going to contemplate a conversation where there is going to be a doomsday scenario in which, yes, Pakistan has said that it's going to react, but I tell you Pakistan will react because this would be an existential question. And by the way, let me also tell you that unfortunately, the Kashmir issue has gotten far more complicated, that dispute, because there's a real strategic underpinning, which is water. And at least one country has demonstrated that it's at a point where it's willing to do away or pull itself out of even the most quote unquote sanctified treaties. So I think there is a lot that can be done between that doomsday and today. All of that is ultimately illegal under international law, especially customary international law, because we are a lower riparian, but there is no enforcement mechanism. So the only logical thing I keep saying is for a conversation to figure out how to keep the sanctity of the treaty, the essence of the treaty, and the dispute resolution mechanism of the treaty intact.
Well, thank you. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, but we're also living in a world which is increasingly not only complex, but as many of my colleagues say, lawless. I mean, we're dealing with superpowers flagrantly disregarding international law, and we're also dealing with people basically abrogating any long existing norms in international behavior. If you can use starvation as a tool of war, you can do anything. So I think nothing's off the table. Nasir, coming back to you, very thoughtful presentation, and I think that the onus of your thesis was basically that we do have a definite reduction in water supply, and this whole issue of around wastage is probably overblown as an argument. But it is a completely facetious argument. I mean, we all recognize that water management, perhaps in our canals and the wastage that sometimes happens with seepage and other things could perhaps be optimized. So I just want you to explore beyond the obvious issue of Pakistan being impacted significantly by climate change and in a reduction in the water that comes from our glaciers, for example. But what can be done in that scenario for optimizing water management?
Right. We are not perhaps the level that we have been around a water deficient country. We are more the bad managers of the water, actually. Yeah, we are water deficient as well, but more of it that because we are bad managers of water resources. Our water losses due to seepage and evaporation, that is called conveyance losses, are close to 60%, which is enormous. So if we release 1,000 cusecs at the head of any canal, at the roots level, at the plant level, we barely receive 400 cusecs out of 1,000 cusecs. What happens to remaining 600? 20%, 15 to 20% is an evaporation loss, which we can't actually stop because of our climatic realities. But for the remaining 40%, the quick estimate is perhaps at least 50% of that could actually be sapped. That 50% means about 15 to 20 million acre, which is huge, which is equal to 2 or 3 Kalabagh dams. And that's seeping down to groundwater. Part of it is good because then it rejuvenates the aquifers and it sustains the groundwater ecosystem. But the lenses where groundwater is saltish, brackish, that water is actually lost. Now, why is it happening? Mainly one, because our distributaries, miners, and water courses are very badly managed. Their cross sections are tempered. We allow illegal outlets, so the whole regime of the flows is disturbed, or it is over silted and it is not maintained. That is one reason, and it's across Pakistan. But somewhere it's a little less or more, but this is the general issue. Second thing is on-farm practices, how our farmers apply water. Now, just our farmers have been trained since their forefathers that let the crop inundate under a sheet of water, which is a very bad practice. The crop water requirement is very scientific. It has to factor in how much is the humidity in air, how much is the temperature in air, what is the stage of maturity of the crop, and so many other factors. But disregarding all that, we just let the water flow on the farm. And farms are uneven too. So that's why the farthest end of water remains submerged with the bigger column of water. All these factors cause a loss about 2 to 3 Kalabagh dams in Pakistan. So perhaps with some efficient management through the irrigation departments are unfortunately very bad managers. Like individuals are like ours are also bad managers in personal life, but more so as the department. So I think bad management of water in canals and the on-farm practices are a serious cause of concern that need to be addressed. There are ways to address it.
Thank you, Nasir. There are several questions, and I'm going to combine a few of them because they cover the same areas. So, Mohit, to you, take these two questions together. Given the current status of diplomatic relations in South Asia, what realistic steps can Pakistan take to re-engage on transboundary water negotiations like the IWT? And a related question to that is the centrality of water issues in terms of overall tensions between India and Pakistan. So maybe you could tackle those together.
Thank you. So in terms of the realistic steps, look, before anything else, we have to understand whether we've got our position settled clearly. Do we know where we want to go? I had mentioned in my presentation that one of the weaknesses was that Pakistan never really figured out what our strategic game plan and ploy was going forward on the Indus Water Treaty if India were to ever do something like it ultimately has done a couple of months ago. So what you need immediately is to understand that the Indus Water Treaty is a whole of government problem. You need multiple ministries and experts to be sitting in the same room to look at every angle and decide where Pakistan wants to take this. So I would say number one, have an internal task force specifically on Indus Water Treaty. At least when I was in government, the Office of the National Security Advisor used to look after these kind of interministerial apex bodies. And from there, you start to look at the legal, the political, the social, the climatic aspect, and then come up with one or two or three options that we want to pursue. That homework still has to be done. Second, I think Pakistan's going to start talking to the rest of the region. Pakistan is not the only country that has a problem with India in the way that India is approaching its neighbors. Bangladesh is very scared about its own treaty renegotiation that's happening and is to be concluded in 2026. China is an upper riparian to India, and there are common interests for Pakistan and China to ensure that water is not weaponized. In fact, the entire region wants the water not to be weaponized. So there has to be diplomacy there. Third, I think Kabul River Basin. I mean, Pakistan's got to think through that space as well. Sooner or later, that conversation will come up. There isn't a really clear sense on how to manage that one either. And so this is the time to start looking at it. In terms of the centrality, I don't think it's incidental. It's never been incidental. It's also not central in the sense that it's never been a cause of war directly or a threat of war directly. But now, I think Kashmir's sort of underpinning of water on the Kashmir dispute is very, very clear. And if we move in a direction where, Dr. Saab, you were saying that anything can happen in today's world, then if we move closer to that anything scenario, then I think you really have a military connotation to this entire thing as well. So it will become more and more central. All of this. Yeah, let me just stop there. No, please go ahead.
So I think one question on in relation to that is China a partner in the discussions around water sharing in the region? How much is this a bilateral issue, or is this actually in its reality a multilateral issue between China, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh? Because these waters that cover the subcontinent, so to say, do require some kind of an international agreement.
Yeah, interestingly, for years, Pakistan held a position that we will deal with Kashmir before anything else with India, and then things will move forward regionally. Today, interestingly, India is at a point where it's stalled everything regional and continues to talk about bilateral as a way of not getting a negotiation going that will get us to an even-handed arrangement. So for Pakistan, it wants water to be a regional issue because all countries actually do care about this deeply. For India, it wants it as a purely bilateral and wants to pretend that it will ultimately be a unilateral issue because it doesn't want China to come in and have a position on the Brahmaputra affecting the IWT. It doesn't want Bangladesh to be saying that India is doing the same thing to Bangladesh. So at the end of the day, it wants this to be bilateral. For Pakistan, yes, it wants China to talk about the fact that China is the upper riparian. If this precedent is set, then there are other upper riparians who can do things like this as well. But I don't see, frankly, a regional agreement that India will agree to under any circumstances because India has equities virtually with every neighbor in terms of water. The rational thing to do is to agree as a region to say, here are the red lines that nobody will ever cross. The interesting part, by the way, about IWT, Dr. Saab, is that neither side is saying that the red line has been crossed. Both sides have different interpretations of how to implement the treaty, given where we are since, there's been a 65-year lapse since 1960 when the treaty came into effect.
Well, I think the bottom line is there is, in this day and age, with existential issues like sharing of resources, climate change, environmental degradation, population growth outstripping resources, no other recourse but to diplomatically and through as they say, muhazzab tariqa, through a way of sitting down and negotiating and discussing how we can live in this environment together. Because there is no alternative to this. And the other scenarios in terms of imposition by force or conflict are just non-tenable. Let me turn to you, Nasir, because there's a whole host of questions here, and I'm going to try and see if I can combine these. And to some extent, you handled some of them, but people really want to know. So they want to know, principally, what are we doing in terms of the glacier melting right now in Pakistan? It's an internal issue, but how can you invest in adaptive infrastructure to mitigate some of these challenges, which are internal, have nothing to do with IWT? Number one. Number two is, how can this be done with the current challenges that we have interprovincially? So you already alluded to the existing institutions, ISRA, CCI, that are not functioning. Do we need another institution to do this, or do we have a way of making all of these functional? So the real question is here is, how do you promote interprovincial harmony in a manner that is politically feasible at this time?
Yeah, Dr. Bhutta, we know that for any working relationship, or even in personal relationships, so the first principle is of transparency that helps you. How you take decisions. Are you taking your stakeholders on board? Are you sharing the real data with the stakeholders? Now, the problem starts from here, actually, that as an upper riparian, there is unfortunately a history of over 100 years of conflict. Please do not forget that IWT's conflict history is perhaps of 70, 80 years, where in case of Pakistan and the upper riparian Punjab, the conflict history is even more than that, which is more than 100 years now. And there is a long history of misgivings and distrust. And I can mention here a number of examples here. I think for striking a workable relationship, creating harmony, there are a few basic principles. One, that be fair. Water distribution should be fair. And what is fair? There could be several interpretations, but I think the most recent one is 1991 Accord. Now, 1991 Accord has a legal cover, at least. Though there are differences of opinion, it is a legally covered accord. Unfortunately, for more than 20 years, an interim arrangement, which is called three-tier formula, was brought in, and water is not being distributed according to 91 Accord. And some interim arrangement, which is not legal, that has been forced to divide and forced to distribute water among 4 provinces. So I think such practices should be avoided. The lower riparian has priority right everywhere in the world. The first, its needs should be covered. It should be fulfilled. And in 1946 agreement of water between Sindh and Punjab, that was the principle. Before the partition, there was an accord which could not continue because of partition. That was the principle, that the lower riparian anywhere, within Sindh even, the lower riparian is Kotri Beret. It should have more right than any upper riparian, first to fulfill needs of Kotri Beret, and then to think of upper riparian. So that principle of lower riparian's right should be respected. Water Accord is some guiding document that should help us. Lastly, the ISRA and CCI. I think these are not bad institutions by design. The way they are structured, there are some things that need to be tweaked. But generally, these are not a bad institution. The problem only is of political interference or interference by some other institution. They are not supposed to. For example, the amendment of its act came from some superior institution, not from parliament. So I think they should stay away from these institutions and let them function on the principle of autonomy and the legality they have been that have been accorded within the constitutional limits. So if they function under their constitutional provisions, they can resolve the conflicts. They have capacity and ability. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I mean, and I completely agree. I think that, and that's the reason why our institute, the Institute for Global Health and Development, chose this topic, because we need a national debate, we need a national consensus and discussion on not just the problem, admiring the problem, but on looking at solutions. What are the tangible solutions? And as many in the audience know, we held a big conference, national conference on this topic 2 years ago. In fact, the proceedings have just been published actually as a documented resource. And we will probably be covering this again in the next few months, again, as a symposium topic. One final question to you, Nasir, which is related to climate adaptation strategies, and I'll ask Ali Tokir this as well. If you were to name top one, two, or three areas where Pakistan needs to invest urgently in better water management, other than the issues that you have covered around organizational oversight issues, what are the technical things that Pakistan needs to be doing for better water management?
I would recommend two things. One, that our infrastructure is very badly managed. It needs to be restored to their original designs. They are so much tempered that it's now obliterated, unfortunately. So that should be restored to the original design parameters. That can save a lot of wastage. And secondly, I think the choice of crops is very critical. We grow sugarcane, we grow rice. These are the water guzzlers. And with this situation of water shortages, I think we need to revisit our cropping pattern as well. The sugarcane, why? Because there are more than 70 sugar mills in this country. And those owners of the mills are the top decision makers in this country. So with that privileged position, they don't let it happen. And the bulk of our water goes to these two crops. And that we can save substantial water and divert it to some other food and fiber crops, food crops especially.
I couldn't agree more, especially for a country that has one of the highest rates of diabetes in the world. Actually, this is one thing which is just as bad as tobacco. Well, without further ado, I want to pass the baton to our distinguished discussant. Dr. Ali Tokir Sheikh is one of Pakistan's foremost experts, if not the foremost expert on water climate change, and he's contributed to this in a variety of ways. He's a former director-in-chief of Lead Pakistan. He's been instrumental in shaping policies both nationally and internationally. And he's playing a huge role at this point in time in representing Pakistan in some of the highest fora in the world, including COPs. And I am very privileged that he is with us today. So, Ali, I'm going to pass the floor to you to perhaps give us your remarks and comments as we close this very rich discussion. You're off camera and you're muted. Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. We can't see you though.
I can see myself though. My camera is.
Let me see if I can turn it on.
There you are. There you are. We can see you in your full glory. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for your very kind introduction. And thank you for picking this important topic for a webinar. This is a very important part of a national discourse. Before I proceed, I must thank Dr. Moeed for giving a very hardcore analysis of the security implications and what we should expect from India. And to Nasir to highlight that how the downstream water flows have been diminishing and they're posing threat to Pakistan's coastline. These are important aspects. I don't know if I can answer all your questions, but allow me to propose, and since you focused on the possibilities and options, how we can begin to address this issue, let me propose a two-pronged strategy. The first one is internal and the second one is external. The internal one assumes that the treaty is dead. For a moment, assume this and then see what Pakistan needs to do. And I propose 6 actions that we need to do internally in order to manage our water scarcity. And by the way, I'm talking the word water scarcity in a very loose sense because the government of Pakistan does not have a definition for scarcity. IRSA will define it differently from WABDA, and WABDA defines it differently from Ministry of Water Resources, which is again distinct from Sindh and distinct from Punjab and distinct from our negotiations with India. So it's a very loaded term and it'll mean different things to different people. In this 5-track strategy, my first thing is we need to increase the productivity of water. And that can be done through different ways. And the first suggestion is to develop a 25-year plan to save water. And if we were to save 1 or 2% of water by 2047, we would have 28 to 64% water savings. And that's a very substantial saving, only with 1% annual saving. We have more water than we are able to handle. We have more per capita water than any of our neighbors like Afghanistan, Iran, India, China. So water is not the issue for us in immediate context, but irrational use is, and therefore water savings and increasing productivity becomes the first challenge. The second point I want to highlight is that the surface water has to be seen in a conjunctive fashion together with our groundwater that we have ruthlessly depleted, and there are options available to us, at least during monsoon periods, to refill our aquifer on annual basis and ensure that our water stock in a given year is rich. The second proposition that I wish to offer is that we have not focused to date on the water that comes now because of climatic changes with more frequent hail torrents. That is a water that we have not tried to protect, and we have not tried to protect our population from the damage that it causes every year. I think if we could find different ways of investing on this, we can provide water to 15 to 20% of our population in the marginalized areas of Sindh and Balochistan and southern Punjab. It's a very substantial sum of water, and it's not terribly expensive to manage it. It's just that we have not prioritized this, and we are focused exclusively on Indus River Basin. And third proposition is to create additional water or a new water, at least for the coastal area population. If supplies to Sindh are indeed going down, and they'll continue to go down in the given scenario, we will have 20 to 30 million people in the coastal areas in Karachi and Sindh, and they are about 10 to 15 or 20% of Pakistan's population in the coming years. And here I am talking about desalination of water. The prices like solar are going down, and creating alternative water means that we are increasing the water security of Pakistan's largest cities and very desperate populations in terms of water. Together with new water is protecting wastewater, which means if Israel can save and recycle 80% of wastewater, let's set a national target of 10, 20, 30%, 40%. And this would mean 5 or 7 million acre feet annually. And that's a very substantial sum in a time period of diminishing water supplies. And the fourth is water pricing. Our water usage is extremely wasteful only because it's free. In fact, not just free, it's subsidized. We will create a dam for $14, $15, $20 billion over a decade or two, and then we'll supply free water to Pakistan's elite farming communities. And that is not a good proposition in economic sense. And therefore, water pricing has to be an instrument of water efficiency. And talking about this, some of the water-thirsty crops that Nasir referred to, such as sugarcane and rice, I think we are one of the only countries that's growing rice in desert. So we need to develop phasing out plan from such districts where this thing has been expanding. And you raise a very important question about new institutions or reforming existing institutions. I want to conclude this track by talking only about one quotation that I have in front of me, if you allow me to read.
Please.
If the changes exceed institutional capacity to absorb those changes, the setting is rife for conflict. And our institutions refuse to grow with time, be it WAPDA, be it the Permanent Commission of Indus Water Treaty, be it IRSA or other institutions. They did not grow and transform with time, and therefore we are rife for conflict. Present challenge offers Pakistan opportunities. And I'm not saying rhetorically, I really think that instead of exporting subsidized water to European middle class, we can do rational instruments of economic instruments to ensure that we convert this crisis into opportunity, and there is plenty of water for us to use it as fuel to our economy. Now, allow me to come to the second track, and I'll take 2 or 3 minutes.
Please.
It's very easy for us to say India should do this or that. We don't have instruments of power at our disposal in the foreseeable future, whereby we could persuade India to do those things. I think just the way we are accusing India of weaponizing water, and that it is in Bhutan, in Bangladesh, in Nepal, in Pakistan, as well as with China. Internally, I think we are becoming prisoners of our own public opinion, and we are politicizing water. I think de-weaponizing and depoliticization of water are equally important. And in the domestic discourse, we have to depoliticize. The politicians in the press media of coverage keep telling us that it will be declaration of war, will go and bomb your infrastructure, water-related infrastructure, or India has been stealing our water. This is not a good environment to create a conducive environment for negotiations. So what we can do? One is both India and Pakistan I blame equally for not invoking Article 7 of the treaty. That Article 7 of the treaty had the provision for future cooperation and optimum development. All the reasons that India has mentioned in its letter are those reasons could have been tackled or invoked by Pakistan or India under Article 7. That Article 7 was our insurance or guarantee to keep the treaty as robust. But unfortunately, the Indus Water Treaties Commissioner's Office from both sides were more in zero-sum context. No. Now, who are the stakeholders in the treaty who can help us worry about it? First is the group of 7 countries led by United States, supported by UK, Canada, Germany, New Zealand, India, that also funded several $1 million over various years. They invested more than $8 billion in this treaty. We need to visit all these capitals where we can, and perhaps not at this stage India, to say that you help us develop a regional public good. And that public good has created several opportunities to avert us crises and conflicts. And this is of great value. This public good, I'll speak about it again and towards the conclusion. That's one level, whereby those who helped us create and fund the treaty and develop the world's largest canal system and a contiguous system that help us successfully manage the green revolution, feed millions and millions of people that otherwise would have starved because of famine and hunger. It was a great gift to the South Asian population that these 8 countries gave. And we need to knock at their doors and engage them and remind them of their investment that they need to help us protect. As luck would have it, these are the same countries who sit on the governing board of the World Bank. And most of them have many significant shares, such as the US has 16% shares. So while we knock at the Foreign Office and domestic leadership, we also need to engage with the representatives that they have at the World Bank's governing. Of course, the governing structure at the World Bank is such that they cannot interfere in the operational side of it, but they steer in governance terms to help protect something that is a global asset in terms of regional peace and stability and food security. We need to be engaging with them, and that won't cost us a whole lot, except a few technical studies to engage with them. And third tier is World Bank, that under the treaty is responsible only to serve as a custodian, provide neutral observer, and not be very active. But it has been active. Last 3 years, it paused the treaty negotiation meetings. So it has played a little bit more role. For 70 years, it has been sitting on a fund, a trust fund. It's a custodian, its own reputational risk and exposure is at stake. It needs to do a little bit more to protect the treaty because it served as a model. It had World Bank develop its own expertise on water issues. And in Central Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, everywhere they took the treaties examples and trained staff to provide water-related portfolios. And therefore, my own sense is that we need to engage with the World Bank to assure them that, look, we know that India is not in particularly keen mood to speak, but at least with the help of by using some of the resources that are in the trust fund, commission some studies that can be technical studies that can be used by both India and Pakistan as the situation calms down after the election in India. I can conclude here, but I promised last sentence was on the regional common good. This regional common good is not only important for India and Pakistan, and particularly for Pakistan, but it's not just about water. Water, as we say, that we have a breathing space. We just have to get our house in order, which is far more, is an integral part of global order that is already trembling, or if not crumbling. There are many threats to it. And these 3 or 4 quarters that I refer to, we need to underline this part. There are treaty beneficiaries that are directly India and Pakistan, which is very good. But treaty will help us protect the common heritage of mankind, that's the Indus Water Civilization. And its role is not only in economic terms, its role is in civilizational terms. And therefore, I'm very convinced and emphatic about my argument. And when the Prime Minister invited me to serve on a task force that they had set up, and they asked me what are some of the priority areas, and this is the 2-pronged strategy that I have proposed, that look, first order of business is to focus on the domestic water reforms, and second is depoliticized, ask all politicians and everyone to shut up and not talk about the treaty. Only 1 or 2 authorized spokespersons should give their view. And beyond that, the only thing we need to do at this stage is engage the initial founders and supporters of this treaty, hoping that we'll be able to persuade them to play an important role, starting with World Bank, who can help us commission some of the studies with trust funds. Thank you very much, Dr. Bhutta, for giving me this opportunity, and I'm delighted to be here with you.
Well, thank you very much, Ali, for, as usual, giving us a very insightful and a very thoughtful set of comments, overall summarizing the issues. I'm very thankful to all the speakers and to the many participants who have stayed the course and asked thoughtful questions. The recording for this webinar will be available in due course, and it will serve as a record of our interaction. But this is the topic that we will continue to visit periodically. The whole issue of climate change, the whole issue of resilience, sustainability is something that our institute focuses on regularly. And I would very much urge you to stay engaged and be part of that discourse as we take this whole discussion forward. So without further ado, let me thank our distinguished panelists and speakers. Dr. Moeed Yusuf, sir, thank you very much. I know that you've been on the move and spared time for this.
Thank you.
Dr. Nasir Maiman, who has been a pillar in terms of supporting some of our activities and also highlighting some of the major challenges that we have internally. And as always, our SDSN Council member, Ali Tokir Sheikh, who has given us some very deep insights into how we might proceed further. So thank you very much. God bless. And till we meet again with our next webinar and topic. Allah Hafiz.